Every sunrise, you don't begin a fresh chapter. You re-enter the same silent arena. The arena where grit wrestles ease, where logic clashes with impulse, where the person you are meets the person you swore you would become. The universe never guaranteed you a fair fight. People won't always get your struggle, and life certainly never signed a contract to follow your schedule. Yet here you are, still pushing back, still fuming, still carrying resentment like reality owes you an apology. This is the exact point where the majority forfeit their power. The Stoic sees the battlefield differently. They don't demand that existence rewrite its rules. They train relentlessly to stand firm within them. The second you quit arguing with what is and start mastering your reaction, a shift happens. You grow quieter, sharper, and more grounded than ever before. Most humans exhaust their lives reacting to the noise around them. The world does not respond to your excuses, it responds to your actions. They groan when progress lags, they point fingers when plans collapse. They narrate their hardships as if the storytelling itself counts as a solution. They genuinely believe that if others could just comprehend their burden, something would magically transform. But nothing changes because the world doesn't reward explanations, it rewards movement. A Stoic grasps this early. Whining doesn't fix the issue. It reinforces the muscle of dodging accountability. Every time you vent, you aren't releasing tension. You are wiring your brain to look outward instead of inward. And that is how command slips through your fingers. Here is the raw, uncomfortable truth. The more energy you pour into what's unjust, the less you have for what you can actually control. That's the deal most people make without even noticing. Look closely at those who truly advance in life. They aren't the loudest. They don't over-explain themselves. They aren't begging to be understood. They are grinding quietly day after day without craving a round of applause. While others argue about how things should have gone, they focus on what can still be done. This is where the real gap forms, not in talent, not in luck, but in where you place your focus. Your focus decides your trajectory. If you're obsessed with blame, you will stay frozen. If you aim your focus at effort, even tiny effort, repeated every single day, you start crawling forward, slowly at first, then with unstoppable momentum. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Start acting within imperfect ones. There's a dangerous comfort in complaining. It lets you feel justified without requiring any real change. It gives the illusion that you diagnose the problem when in truth you've only described it. The Stoic rejects this completely. Instead of moaning, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask a different question: "What is required of me right now?" That one switch rewires everything. It drags you from passivity into motion, from confusion into precision, from softness into self-command. You stop praying for better circumstances and start becoming stronger inside the ones you already have. Think about how often people stall because they don't feel ready, or because the situation isn't ideal. They wait for the perfect mood, the golden opportunity, the right support system. But those moments almost never show up the way they imagine. A Stoic doesn't wait for perfect conditions because they know conditions are never fully theirs to control. The willingness to act despite the discomfort, despite the uncertainty, despite the internal resistance. This is what most people dodge, not the labor itself, but the feeling of the labor, the boredom, the self-doubt, the absence of an instant reward. So they flee into distractions, into overthinking, into endless planning that they label preparation, but it's just avoidance dressed in a suit. The discipline of a Stoic isn't theatrical, it's silent and repetitive. It shows up in small choices that nobody witnesses. Choosing to start the task instead of delaying it. Choosing to hold focus when the mind wants to wander. Choosing to keep going when there's no applause, no recognition, no guarantee of victory. These choices feel trivial in the moment, but over months and years they reshape the person making them. This is how real strength is forged. Not in rare explosions of intensity, but in daily acts of self-mastery. Complaining promises relief but delivers stagnation. Action demands something from you, but creates movement. You cannot have both at the same time. Every minute you spend narrating your situation is a minute not spent upgrading it. Every time you rationalize an action, you make it easier to repeat. And gradually this becomes your automatic pattern, not because life is out to get you, but because you've trained yourself to stand still. The Stoic breaks this loop by stripping away unnecessary words and replacing them with deliberate action. They understand that progress doesn't need a press release. It needs to be constructed brick by brick. When you start living like this, something subtle but fierce changes. You stop measuring your life by how you feel and start measuring it by what you do. You stop asking if things are fair and start asking if you're acting rightly. You stop hunting for sympathy and start building real capability. And with that shift, you become harder to rattle, harder to dishearten, and harder to halt. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Once you drop the complaints and start moving, another illusion crumbles. The belief that success belongs to the lucky ones, the chosen ones, the ones who happen to be in the right place at the right time. That belief is cozy because it removes accountability. It lets you claim your results aren't entirely in your hands, but a Stoic doesn't chase comfort. They chase truth. Luck might influence outcomes, but it never defines character, and without character, no victory can last. What truly builds a life isn't a single lucky break. It's the repeated decisions a person makes when no one is watching, when no reward is promised, when progress feels painfully slow. Most people underestimate the power of ordinary effort applied consistently. They wait for a lightning bolt of motivation, a flash of clarity, a sudden event that will fix everything overnight. But real change almost never arrives in dramatic explosions. It accumulates silently through repetition, through doing what's necessary again and again, even when it feels pointless. The Stoic understands that greatness isn't born in moments of intensity, it's born in the discipline of consistency. The difference between those who advance and those who stay trapped isn't that one group is more gifted. It's that one group is willing to endure the boring grind without losing their direction. There's a specific resistance that appears the moment effort gets uncomfortable. The mind starts negotiating, finding alternatives, suggesting delays, questioning if the work is even worth it. This is where most people slow down or quit, not because the road is impossible, but because the discomfort feels unnecessary. A Stoic sees this resistance for what it is. They don't interpret it as a stop sign. They recognize it as a signal that they're touching the edge of their current limits, and instead of backing away, they lean in, not with brute force, but with calm persistence. They understand that what feels brutal today becomes manageable tomorrow, and eventually becomes part of their very nature. To live this way demands a different relationship with effort. Effort is no longer something you give only when you feel inspired. It becomes your default standard, your baseline. You don't ask if you feel like working, you ask if the work needs to be done. You don't measure your day by how easy it was, you measure it by whether you stayed true to your intention. This removes the instability of relying on your mood. Your actions become steady, not because your emotions are always balanced, but because your principles are. Many people look at high achievers and only see the visible trophy, the award, the recognition. What they miss is the mountain of unseen effort behind it. The hours that felt utterly forgettable. The days where nothing seemed to shift, the moments where continuing required quiet resolve, not excitement. A Stoic doesn't envy the trophy, they study the process. They know that if you align yourself with the right actions and repeat them long enough, results become a natural byproduct, not something you desperately chase. There's a deeper transformation here too. When you embrace effort at this level, you stop tying your identity to immediate results. If something fails, it doesn't define you. It teaches you. If progress is slow, it doesn't crush you. It sharpens your patience. You start seeing effort not just as a means to an end, but as part of your character. The simple act of showing up, of continuing, of doing what's required, becomes its own form of success. And from that position, external outcomes lose their power to hijack your peace of mind. This doesn't mean you ignore results. It means you're no longer dependent on them to validate your actions. You act because it's right, because it's necessary, because it's within your control. Whether recognition follows or not becomes secondary. Your effort is the one thing no one can take from you. This is what gives the Stoic an unusual edge. They aren't easily derailed by comparison. They aren't crushed by temporary setbacks. And they aren't driven by approval. Their focus stays locked on what they can do here and now with clarity and purpose. Over time, this way of living produces something that looks like luck from the outside. People see the result and assume it happened suddenly or was handed out. But what they're actually witnessing is the outcome of sustained effort applied without interruption, guided by discipline rather than emotion. What appears fortunate is often just consistent. And consistency, unlike luck, is something you can actively choose. When you truly understand this, you stop waiting for circumstances to improve and start refining your actions instead. You stop asking when things will get easier and start becoming more capable. You stop hoping for a miracle breakthrough and start building one step at a time, through effort that doesn't depend on how you feel. And in doing so, you put your life back into your own hands. Not by controlling everything around you, but by committing fully to what you can control. Your effort, your discipline, and your willingness to persist. As you begin to see that effort shapes your road, another quiet trap reveals itself. The belief that you must wait for the right moment before you fully commit. It sounds logical at first. You tell yourself you'll begin when things settle down, when you feel more prepared, when your situation improves, when you're more certain. But this waiting game is rarely about real preparation. It's hesitation wearing a mask of reason. A Stoic sees through this instantly. They understand that the future never arrives in a perfectly organized package, and clarity isn't something that appears before action, it emerges because of action. Most people delay not because they lack ability, but because they're uncomfortable with uncertainty. They want guarantees. They want to know their effort will lead somewhere. They want to feel ready before they start. But readiness isn't a fixed state. It's built through engagement. The moment you start, even clumsily, you begin to see more clearly. The moment you act, confusion starts to organize itself into direction. Waiting does the opposite. It keeps everything abstract, distant, and unresolved. The longer you wait, the heavier the task feels. Not because it has changed, but because your mind has inflated it into something far larger than reality. There's a hidden tax to waiting that most people ignore. Every day you delay, you're not standing still. You're reinforcing a habit. You're training yourself to postpone, to bargain with discomfort, to prioritize ease over progress. This pattern becomes familiar, and what was once a temporary pause slowly turns into a way of life. A Stoic never lets this pattern take root. They interrupt it early, not by forcing dramatic action, but by choosing to move even in tiny ways, even without certainty. Because movement breaks hesitation, and hesitation, if left unchecked, becomes paralysis. You might think that starting later under better conditions will make things easier, but the opposite is often true. The longer you wait, the more expectations you pile on yourself, and the more pressure you create around the act of beginning. What could have been a simple step becomes a heavy ordeal. A Stoic removes this weight by refusing to worship the perfect moment. They don't ask when is the best time to start. They ask what can be done now within the limits of this moment. This question grounds them. It pulls their attention back from imaginary futures into present action. There's also the myth that you must feel confident before you begin. But confidence isn't a prerequisite, it's a result. It grows from repeated exposure, from showing up, from doing the work enough times that it becomes familiar. If you wait to feel confident, you'll wait forever, because confidence cannot develop in the absence of action. A Stoic accepts this discomfort. They allow themselves to begin without certainty, without assurance, and without needing to feel ready. This willingness to act without emotional permission is what separates motion from stagnation. The mind often invents stories to justify delay. It tells you that you need more time, more knowledge, more clarity, more support. And while preparation has its place, it can easily become a hiding spot from responsibility. A Stoic is careful not to confuse preparation with avoidance. They prepare when necessary, but they don't hide behind preparation. They recognize when it's time to move forward, even if the path is incomplete, because they understand that no path is ever fully visible from the beginning. It reveals itself step by step in response to action. When you begin to live this way, something shifts in how you relate to time. You stop seeing the present as a temporary waiting room before your real life begins. You start treating it as the only place where life can actually be shaped. You stop postponing your effort for a future version of yourself, and you start acting as the person you claim you want to become. This removes the gap between intention and behavior. You're no longer planning to change, you're practicing change. The Stoic doesn't rush, but they also don't delay. They move with intention, not urgency, but without hesitation. They understand that time will pass regardless of what they do. And the only question is whether they will use it to strengthen themselves or weaken themselves through inaction. Each moment offers a simple choice: to act or to postpone, to engage or to withdraw. Over time, these choices accumulate and quietly shape the direction of a life. There is no perfect moment waiting for you. There is only the moment you are in, with its limits, its flaws, and its opportunities. If you can learn to act within this moment without waiting for it to become ideal, you remove one of the greatest barriers that holds people back. You stop negotiating with time and start working with it. And in doing so, you gain something far more valuable than perfect conditions. You gain momentum. Once you stop waiting and begin to act, you quickly encounter something most people try to avoid: the real cost of discipline. Not the concept of discipline, but the daily reality of it. The repeated choice to do what's necessary instead of what's comfortable. Many people want change, but they aren't willing to pay this price. They imagine that progress should feel motivating, that growth should feel rewarding. But more often it feels quiet, repetitive, and at times deeply uncomfortable. A Stoic does not fight this. They understand that discipline isn't a punishment, it's a framework, a way of aligning your actions with what you know is right, regardless of how you feel in the moment. There's a common belief that motivation will carry you forward, that if you feel inspired enough, you'll naturally do what needs to be done. But motivation is unstable. It rises and falls without warning. If your actions depend on it, your progress will always be a roller coaster. A Stoic removes this dependency. They don't wait to feel ready. They act because the action itself is necessary. This creates a different kind of stability. Your day is no longer dictated by your mood, but by your commitment. And commitment, unlike emotion, can be maintained even in moments of doubt or fatigue. Discipline begins in small, nearly invisible decisions, choosing to start when you'd rather delay, choosing to continue when the initial energy fades, choosing to stay focused when distractions appear. These moments seem insignificant, but they are where your character is forged. Each time you follow through, you reinforce a pattern. Each time you avoid, you weaken it. Over time, these patterns become habits, and those habits define the direction of your life. A Stoic pays attention to these small decisions because they understand that a life isn't changed in a single heroic moment. It's changed in thousands of quiet choices. There's also a discomfort that comes with discipline that many people misinterpret. It's not the discomfort of harm. It's the discomfort of growth. When you push beyond what's familiar, your mind resists, it questions, it complains, it looks for ways to return to ease. This resistance is natural, but it's not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're expanding your capacity. A Stoic learns to recognize this difference. They don't treat discomfort as an enemy. They treat it as part of the process. They move through it calmly, without dramatizing it, without turning it into something larger than it is. Another challenge is the absence of immediate results. Discipline often requires effort without instant reward. You work, but nothing seems to change. You repeat the same actions, and progress feels glacial. This is where most people lose patience. They start questioning whether their effort is worth it, whether they should change direction, whether it would be easier to quit. A Stoic remains steady here. They understand that results follow a different timeline than effort. What is done today may not be visible tomorrow, but it's not lost. It accumulates quietly beneath the surface until one day it becomes undeniable. To live with discipline is to accept a certain level of sacrifice, not in a dramatic sense, but in daily trade-offs. Time spent working instead of escaping into distraction. Energy directed toward improvement instead of comfort. Attention placed on what matters instead of what's easy. Sacrifice short-term ease for long-term strength. These sacrifices are not losses, they are investments. You are exchanging temporary comfort for lasting power. A Stoic makes this exchange consciously. They don't feel deprived because they understand what they're building. There's also a shift in identity that happens when discipline becomes consistent. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries when it feels right, and you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This shift is subtle but incredibly powerful. It changes how you approach challenges, how you respond to setbacks, and how you measure your progress. You are no longer dependent on external validation. The act of doing what you said you would do becomes its own form of stability. The world often celebrates outcomes, but a Stoic places more value on the process that creates them, because outcomes can be influenced by factors outside your control, but the process remains yours. When you commit to discipline, you are choosing to focus on what cannot be taken from you, your effort, your consistency, your willingness to continue. This creates a form of strength that is not easily shaken by circumstances. In the end, discipline is not about forcing yourself into a rigid cage. It's about freeing yourself from the unpredictability of your own impulses. It removes the need to constantly negotiate with yourself. You know what needs to be done, and you do it, not because it's easy, not because it's always enjoyable, but because it's the path you have chosen. And through this repetition, through this quiet consistency, you move further away from a life of reaction and closer to a life of intention. As discipline becomes part of how you act, you begin to notice something that most people overlook. Change does not arrive in sudden breakthroughs. It forms through repetition. There's a tendency to look for dramatic moments, a single decision that will transform everything, a burst of effort that will erase the past. But this is rarely how a life is shaped. A Stoic understands that what you do consistently carries more weight than what you do occasionally. The small actions you repeat each day, often unnoticed and uncelebrated, are the ones that quietly build or weaken your character over time. Most people underestimate these small actions because they do not produce immediate visible results. reading a few pages, maintaining focus for a short period, choosing to complete a task instead of delaying it. These don't feel significant in isolation. Because of this, they are easy to dismiss, easy to skip, and easy to replace with something more comfortable. But a Stoic sees beyond the moment. They understand that repetition compounds, that each small action is not just an isolated event, it is part of a pattern, and that pattern becomes a direction. There's a subtle shift that occurs when you begin to respect these small decisions. You stop asking whether something is important based on how it feels, and you begin to judge it based on whether it aligns with who you are trying to become. This removes the need for constant re-evaluation. You don't wake up each day and decide from scratch what kind of person you will be. You reinforce it through your actions. Each repetition becomes a vote, and over time those votes accumulate into identity. The challenge is that these actions often take place in moments where there is no external pressure, no recognition, and no immediate consequence. No one is watching, no one is measuring, and no one is rewarding you for doing the right thing. This is where most people lose consistency. They rely on external validation to maintain effort, and when it's absent, their actions begin to fade. A Stoic does not depend on being seen. They act according to their principles, not according to attention. This creates a form of consistency that is not easily disrupted. It's also important to recognize how easily small negative actions can accumulate in the same way. Just as discipline builds strength over time, neglect builds weakness. Delaying a task once may seem harmless, but repeated often, it becomes a habit of avoidance. Losing focus for a moment may not seem significant, but repeated daily, it fragments your attention. These patterns form quietly, and because they are gradual, they are rarely noticed until their effects are clear. A Stoic pays attention early. They don't wait for consequences to appear before they adjust their behavior. There's a patience required in this process that many people struggle with. You are investing effort without immediate return, maintaining consistency without visible reward, trusting that what you are building will eventually take form. This patience is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and grounded in understanding. You know that the process works even if the results are not yet visible. This allows you to continue without becoming discouraged by the pace of progress. Over time, these repeated actions begin to create momentum. What once required effort becomes more natural. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. This is not because the tasks themselves have changed, but because you have changed. Your capacity has expanded, your resistance has decreased, and your focus has strengthened. This is the quiet power of consistency. It transforms the person performing the actions, not just the outcome of those actions. A Stoic does not rush this process, nor do they become impatient with it. They understand that anything built with care takes time, and anything rushed tends to collapse. Instead of seeking rapid change, they seek steady improvement. They measure progress not by dramatic shifts but by stability. Are they more consistent today than before? Are they more focused, more disciplined, more aligned with their principles? These are the markers that matter. When you begin to live this way, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer rely on bursts of intensity to move forward. You rely on continuity. You show up. You do what is required, and you repeat. There's no need to make it complex, no need to make it impressive. What matters is that it is done, and that it is done again, over time. This creates a foundation that is difficult to break because it is not built on temporary motivation but on repeated action. The life you experience is not shaped by what you intend to do. It is shaped by what you repeatedly do. Intentions may guide you, but actions define you. A Stoic keeps this in mind at all times. They don't wait for the right moment to change everything. They begin with what is in front of them. They act and they repeat. And through this quiet repetition, they build a life that reflects not what they hoped for, but what they consistently chose. As you continue to act and repeat what is necessary each day, you will inevitably encounter failure. Not once, but many times, in ways both small and significant. Plans will not unfold as expected. Effort will not always produce immediate results, and outcomes will sometimes fall short of what you intended. Most people interpret these moments as signs that something is wrong, either with the path or with themselves. They begin to doubt, to hesitate, and eventually to withdraw. But a Stoic sees failure through a different lens. They do not treat it as a final judgment, but as information, as feedback that can be examined, understood, and used. There's a common mistake in how people relate to failure. They attach identity to it. A single setback becomes a statement about who they are. If something doesn't work, they conclude that they are not capable, not prepared, or not suited for the task. This interpretation is what creates suffering. The event itself is neutral. It is the meaning you assign to it that gives it weight. A Stoic is careful here. They separate what happened from what they think about what happened. By doing so, they protect their clarity. They allow themselves to learn without collapsing into self-judgment. Failure often carries discomfort, not just in the result, but in the experience. There's frustration, disappointment, and sometimes embarrassment. These reactions are natural, but they don't have to control what comes next. A Stoic does not suppress these feelings, but they don't follow them blindly either. They observe them. They allow them to pass, and then they return to the task of understanding what can be improved. This creates a gap between emotion and action. In that gap there is choice, and in that choice there is strength. It's also important to understand that failure is not an interruption of the process. It is part of it. No meaningful effort moves in a straight line. There are adjustments, corrections, and missteps along the way. Each one provides insight that cannot be gained otherwise. If everything worked immediately, there would be no need to refine, no need to adapt, and no opportunity to deepen your understanding. A Stoic does not seek to avoid failure entirely. They seek to use it well. They ask what can be learned, what can be changed, and what can be done differently next time. The real danger lies not in failing, but in stopping. When you stop, you remove the possibility of improvement. You fix yourself in place, defined by the last outcome you experienced. Many people reach this point quietly. They don't make a clear decision to quit. They simply stop trying with the same level of commitment. They lower their expectations, reduce their effort, and tell themselves they have accepted reality. But this is not acceptance, it is retreat. A Stoic distinguishes between the two. Acceptance means recognizing what is outside your control, but continuing to act fully within what is. Retreat means withdrawing from effort because the result was not immediate or favorable. There's a resilience that develops when you choose to continue despite failure. Each time you return to the work, you weaken the fear associated with falling short. What once felt discouraging begins to feel manageable. You become less reactive, less shaken, and more focused on the process itself. This doesn't mean failure becomes pleasant, but it becomes less threatening. It no longer has the power to stop you, only to guide you. Over time, this approach changes your relationship with progress. You no longer expect constant success, and you no longer interpret difficulty as a signal to withdraw. Instead, you begin to see each attempt as part of a larger pattern. Some attempts will work, some will not, but all of them contribute to your understanding. This removes the pressure to be perfect. You are not trying to avoid mistakes. You are trying to move forward with awareness. A Stoic also understands that persistence is not the same as blind repetition. Continuing doesn't mean doing the same thing without reflection. It means adjusting while maintaining direction. You observe what happened. You refine your approach, and you apply that refinement in the next attempt. This is how progress becomes sustainable. It is not driven by force, but by learning applied over time. When you adopt this mindset, failure loses its finality. It becomes temporary, part of the movement rather than the end of it. What determines the outcome is not the presence of setbacks, but your response to them. If you continue, you remain in motion. If you learn, you improve. If you adjust, you increase your chances. The only true ending occurs when you decide that the effort is no longer worth continuing. In the end, failure is not what defines the path. It is the point where many people turn back, and where a few decide to continue. A Stoic belongs to the latter. They don't rush, they don't dramatize, and they don't lose themselves in the setback. They remain steady, they learn what is necessary, and they move forward again, not because they are certain of the outcome, but because continuing is within their control, and that is enough. As you learn to continue through failure, the next step becomes clear. Direction must replace drift. Many people move through life reacting to whatever appears in front of them, responding to demands, distractions, and expectations without ever deciding what truly matters. They stay busy, but they don't move with intention. A Stoic does not live this way. They understand that without a clear aim, effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort leads to exhaustion without progress. So they begin by choosing a direction, not based on impulse, not based on comparison, but based on what is meaningful and aligned with their values. A goal, in the Stoic sense, is not simply an outcome to achieve. It is a guide for action. It gives structure to your decisions. It filters what deserves your attention, and it reduces unnecessary conflict within the mind. When you know what you're working toward, it becomes easier to decide what to do and what to ignore. Without this clarity, everything competes for your focus, and your energy becomes divided. A Stoic protects their focus carefully because they understand that attention is limited, and whatever consumes it shapes their life. Distraction is one of the most common obstacles, not because it is powerful, but because it is constant. Small interruptions, endless information, and shifting priorities slowly erode your ability to remain engaged with what matters. Most people don't notice this erosion until their attention is fragmented and their progress has slowed. A Stoic notices early. They observe where their time goes, what occupies their thoughts, and what pulls them away from their intention. And once they see it clearly, they begin to remove what is unnecessary, not all at once, but gradually, with discipline. They don't attempt to control everything. They simply stop giving attention to what doesn't deserve it. Focus is not about doing more, it's about doing what is essential without interruption. It requires you to remain with a task even when it becomes repetitive, even when it loses its initial appeal. This is where many people drift away. They seek novelty, they switch between tasks, they follow what feels engaging in the moment. But progress does not follow novelty, it follows sustained attention. A Stoic accepts this. They remain with what matters, not because it is always interesting, but because it is necessary. Alongside focus comes responsibility. This is where many people hesitate, because responsibility removes excuses. It means acknowledging that while you cannot control every outcome, you are fully accountable for your actions, your choices, and your responses. It's easy to blame circumstances, to point to external factors, to explain why something didn't work. But as long as blame is present, control is lost. A Stoic removes blame, not because they deny reality, but because they refuse to give away their agency. They accept that whatever the situation, their response remains their own. Taking responsibility creates clarity. You stop asking who or what is at fault, and you begin asking what can be done. This shift simplifies decision-making. Instead of being pulled in multiple directions by emotion or circumstance, you return to what is within your control, your effort, your discipline, your focus, your willingness to continue. These become the foundation of your actions. Over time, this creates stability. You are no longer easily influenced by external changes because your direction is internally defined. There's also a sense of ownership that comes with this approach. You begin to see your life not as something that is happening to you, but as something you are actively shaping. This doesn't mean you control every detail, but it means you are engaged, you are intentional, and you are accountable. This removes the feeling of helplessness that many people experience even in difficult situations. You retain the ability to choose your response, and that choice carries weight. A Stoic does not expect the path to be simple. There will be moments of doubt, periods of slow progress, and situations that test your patience. But with a clear goal, protected focus, and a strong sense of responsibility, these moments do not derail you. They become part of the process. You adjust where necessary. You continue where possible, and you remain aligned with your direction. This consistency, applied over time, creates movement that is steady and difficult to disrupt. If this message resonated, hit like and subscribe to Mindshift Philosophy for more brutal truths on building an unshakable mind. In the end, changing your life is not a single decision. It is a series of aligned actions. You define what matters, you protect your attention, and you take responsibility for how you act each day. You remove what distracts you, you commit to what strengthens you, and you continue regardless of how you feel in the moment. This is not dramatic and it is not immediate, but it is reliable. And through this reliability, you build a life that reflects your intention, not your impulses.